Good morning and welcome to Rise and Shine Sundays. I'm your host, Jamie Rich, the one who always, it seems to, every Sunday morning find one little button that he has not necessarily turned off. We're glad to have you with us. We're glad to welcome those of you who are watching in our YouTube live stream. And we have a very exciting broadcast set up for you today. One of the things that we do here every week in Rise and Shine Sundays is talk about what's emerging in our lives. For us, the magic comes from being able to have a discussion about what's really happening around us and for us, what's alive in us. And so we do things a little bit differently around here. We're here to ask questions. We're here to listen to your responses in the chat. So if you are watching us today, please, chime in on the chat as we watch. And we build everything that we do around here on Rise and Shine Sundays. And this particular Sunday, we are beginning with this question, which is, can you stay in discomfort without rushing to fix it? So sometimes, even when you're starting out a show, just like you're doing this, and you see that there's your logo is still on the screen during the opening credits, can you stay in your discomfort without rushing to fix it? One of the reasons why we were focusing on this is that, for those of us who are going through life transitions, dealing with this level of uncertainty and discomfort can be really overwhelming. And when something uncertain or unresolved happens, too often we fall back on that conditioning that tells us we've got to fix it immediately. We've got to get the answer, make a decision, resolve the tension. But what if, in rushing to fix things using old solutions, we end up not discovering what new is trying to emerge? So this week, we want to focus on what happens when you stay in the middle long enough to trust what's still forming. So we're, if you will, exploring the productive part of discomfort in transformation, and those moments of uncertainty in our lives where that generative energy is trying to take place. So that's the conversation that we're inviting you to this morning. And the conversation that I'm delighted to always have is our guest in studio this morning. And joining me in studio for this conversation is my good friend, Ray Guillot. Greetings to all of you who are in the chat, and greetings to you, Ray.
Hey, Jamie, it's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, as some of you already know, this topic is one of those that kind of lands really close to home for me, because one of the things that, even with this particular this broadcast that we're doing with Rise and Shine Sundays, right? We want to be able to create something that is a little different. And oftentimes, when we were first putting together this show, we didn't know exactly, not this particular episode, but even just the container for this. We wanted to focus on what was emerging. And even though we had ideas and concepts about what we wanted to be able to see have happen with, we needed to kind of stay in the discomfort. We needed to be able to say, we're experimenting on it. And some wonderful things happen when we do that, right?
Yeah, I think Jamie, I think there's another episode we can do on what happens in between the in between the episodes or in between the Sundays, because
Mm-hmm.
you touch on a very important thing, is that you and I chat as much as possible about, okay, what really transpired, what happened, what did we learn, what changed, and what I find fascinating is uh, it's things that people have shared in the chat or live with Sang, is because it didn't stop after the episode. We said, well, Sang explored this area, and we went further into the idea, and said, well, what does that change for the
Mm-hmm.
next show? And
Mm-hmm.
what I love is when you send, well, hey, this is the theme for the next one. I'm going, wow. That's it's like I keep telling Jamie he's never going to run out of things to talk about.
And we're speaking of which, Ray's referencing when Sang, who was one of our studio guests last week, was here. And Sang is a great storyteller, and we're sending out good thoughts to her this morning. And we look forward to welcoming her back. And we look forward to welcoming anyone who is watching this particular broadcast, that if you'd like to join us in studio, that opportunity exists. And we'll talk about that later on. But as it is with many things, what you're talking about, Ray, is that it's almost like our entire culture is set up to provide immediate resolution. You've got a problem, let's fix it. If you're uncomfortable, let's change it. If you're uncertain, and this is the big one, if you're uncertain, you got to decide. It's as if, that modernity clock is just sitting there, tick, 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 tick. And I don't know if this has been true for you or those of you who are in the chat, you might want to respond to this. We've been trained to believe that discomfort is a problem to solve rather than a signal that something is trying to emerge, right? And that reflex that we have, the urgent need to make it stop, to get the answer, to resolve the tension right now, is actually preventing us from discovering what wants to come next. It seems kind of counterintuitive a little bit, right? That we've got to rush to get out of this discomfort.
Yeah, I find it really interesting is that the idea of jumping into fix mode right away, and we've all been on teams or groups or client experiences if you're an entrepreneur or working in business where there's not any foresight or context that's sometimes given. Well, why did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And what did we learn from that? Instead of just once it's fixed, we forget it
Mm-hmm.
and we
Mm-hmm.
jump back into we'll fix the next one.
Right. And I want to make sure that we're really clear about something, is that we're talking about discomfort, not emergency situations. I mean, if
Yeah.
there if there is a bus coming right at you, this is not the time to sit there and go, well, maybe I should stay in this discomfort of the bus rushing to come at me. I need to fix this. But there is a real difference in our lives between the bus coming at us. We almost feel like everything is the bus that's coming at us, right? And so we apply that strategy as if everything is an emergency resolution that needs to be fixed. And so sometimes even just understanding the differences in discomfort, right? Um, because the unfamiliar, the uncertain is uncomfortable. But again, the secret comes, in not going into the conditioning that says, well, how do I make this feeling go away? Right. Um, because when we're talking about emergence and when we're talking about not about the bus coming at us, but like a life transition that we need to make, a broadcast that we need to put together about a show called Rise and Shine Sundays, a business project that is emerging, a relationship that is evolving, what's trying to be born through this feeling of discomfort, right? And that's that trap of the fix. Is it just sometimes, um, and this is. Thank you, Jessica, for reminding us with that wonderful echo comment there, and good morning to you as well. Discernment is the key, and discernment is that moment where instead of going into the immediate fix, right, the immediate thing, I need to kind of do a little assessment here, right? Certainly, you've done the triage and recognize it's not really a bus that's coming at you. But secondly, can I stay in this discomfort without rushing to fix it? And I picked that word rushing specifically for that reason, because it is the reflex to rush, not that you may need to tend to something immediately, right? And that discomfort can be resolved, but it's understanding that tension in that moment, right?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting is that when something happens and it's uncomfortable, you sort of either go into, oh, I need to stop it right away. But also what I've experienced is, oh no, this is happening again.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of looking at the pattern or sitting with it, as you've just mentioned, one of the things I think you shared or that I read in support of what you shared was um, we're so used to fixing that we've not developed our muscle strength and muscle memory for how to sit with the discomfort. So that's a learning process where and the I think the statement that resonated with me is, okay, what is this discomfort teaching us? What is there to learn
Mm-hmm.
from the discomfort? so that you can recognize the patterns if it happens again or something new. So you don't try to block the discomfort, you allow it in.
That's intriguing. What you just said is also sometimes this is a familiar discomfort. One question, again, I love the fact that this just emerged in the conversation because oftentimes we find ourselves in situations again and again, and that discomfort is there, just because we've been, again, conditioned to not sit with it for a bit. We've rushed to fix it, but we really have fixed something that didn't resolve what was causing the discomfort before. And that is just, that habitual pattern gets repeated. I find myself in this situation again. I sit with the discomfort until I come up with some sort of band-aid solution to it, and the band-aid solution somehow resolves the tension, but it doesn't necessarily create a solution to the conditions that got you into the discomfort to begin with. That's brilliant, Ray. That was not in my show notes, by the way.
Well, it triggered something in me that you shared, and it's probably not related, but I always love the expression. I don't know who came up with it first. We'll have to Google it. Is are we shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic?
Correct.
Which is
Correct.
part of the thinking in the terms of the ship is going down or the ship's in trouble, and we're rearranging the chairs because they're not quite aligned properly, or they should
Correct.
be. There should be more over there.
Right. If you're just joining us, the conversation this morning is revolving around a discussion about can you stay in discomfort without rushing to fix it? Uh, and so this is one of the things that Ray and I are sort of talking to pick up on your Titanic reference, Ray. That's where the trap gets, like we talked about it before. You're going to be resolving the situation on what you knew before without looking, well, okay, we're going to go fix the chairs because, normally that's what we need to do to fix. That's what my experience has taught me, and not recognizing that you're on the Titanic and you're going to be requiring a whole different set of solutions because this is a situation that you've not dealt with before, right? So, I, I don't, we talked about this earlier, this idea of safety, right? Um, is a self-determined felt sense, right? And so sometimes it's okay that you can really check in with yourself. And I don't want to bring in one of the comments here. Um, if it's a form of of discomfort we've never experienced before, we want to still be able to discern that, right? But one of the things that I think is really important is that there can be a familiarity to the discomfort, right? But then we get this idea of creating a familiar resolve to it, which isn't necessarily the fix, right? And so if we could, in that moment where we're in this discomfort, recognize, what do I require to feel safe in this particular moment? And you know we're we're looking sometimes for an external validation that it's okay to stay there. But if you can begin to see safety as a self-determined felt sense, right? It makes staying in discomfort a lot easier. Because when you see that sense of safety as something that is self-determined, as opposed to whether or not somebody tells you that you're okay, or, I mean, there's all different ways that you can interpret safety, right? But um, the ability to feel safe in discomfort is where that emergence comes in. Just like you were saying, can I sit with this to be able to see what comes from that experience? And it it is a challenge to get to it because we're always again taught to look outside for solutions. We need to change this moment immediately. um, Obviously this is happening to me again. What did I do wrong? Which puts you back into the past, right? Or worried about an imagined future. But if you're able to really figure out that compass for yourself of a safety that is self-determined, that allows you to stay in the minute. Does that resonate with anyone in the chat, or with you, Ray?
Yeah, I like the idea that you've already identified that there's a shift in perception here. Is that if is the fixing idea or pressure coming from the inside or outside? And most of the time it's the outside. So with self-determined, like for safety or even determining how to respond, self-determined is you're the best. It has to come from inside of you, self-determination
Right.
and felt sense. So it's not a necessarily a a code of conduct or a list of things that you follow. The felt sense is about sensing.
Mhm.
So like if I told you, Jamie, well, you have to feel safe because I've created this space where you should be safe. Well, how do I know?
Mhm.
I can't be you. I can
Mhm.
sympathize, I can support, but I can't tell you you should be safe. It's
Right.
self-determined, and it's a felt sense that you might communicate, well, I can't be safe because, and I'll go, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and there's a truism that's been kind of revealed in the chat, which is that sometimes these things are painful, and sometimes that pain is okay. And that's where that sort of sense of safety comes from. I know all of us have faced physical illnesses or emotional challenges where it does take time for that pain to resolve. But again, even understanding the pain is your self determination of the pain, right? It's that idea of being able to say, a very wise woman put this in the chat here. Let me show this. I always thought if you're going through hell, keep on going. There's even song lines, say, rush through to avoid the pain. And, that is that challenge that we're in right now in terms of whether or not we fix something, rush to fix it, or we stay. And how you determine how long you want to stay in that, if you do see that emergence to resolve your pain, sometimes you need to cry. Sometimes you need to sit with that discomfort. Sometimes you need, because then what you do when you realize that you have this sense of safety and you're able to say, well, what is it that I require to help? What do I require in this now moment to experience peace? Right? Is that sitting with it to not make a decision? Is that reaching out to someone to help with this discomfort? Is it getting information? It goes back to the key concept that Jessica reminded us is discernment. And when we talk about discernment, discernment is often what's new in a situation, not the conditioned behavior that you've always met this problem with before. That's not to say that if you've had a successful way of dealing with discomfort, like, oftentimes I think I used this analogy with you, Ray. I was sitting last Sunday after we got done with the broadcast with a group of friends who were just, uh, already at this level of intensity of a discussion and an argument. And I was coming in from the last week's show, very grounded and feeling really great. And when I got there, I was able to assess this situation. I didn't need to fix the fact that everybody at the table was already having an argument about something, right? But what I needed to do, one of the self care strategies that I've learned is to just simply, well, wait, no one's really focusing on me. Let me close my eyes. Let me take a breath. Let me hear that noise that's going on around me. And when I opened my eyes, there was a person sitting next to me, and I just went in and I had a casual conversation with this person. So that's a strategy that I've used in the past to resolve present discomfort, right? And so going back again to what Jessica was trying to remind us earlier about discernment is that's that moment where instead of rushing to fix it, which is like, God dang it, would you guys just shut up? I just got here at the table. Why are we always at a fever pitch? Could we just like not do this? Can I just fix it by, raising to that same level of energy? Or can I take a minute without rushing to fix it and know how to proceed? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And it brought up another thing I saw this week as well is part of the conflict and part of the discomfort is the general theory or process or pressures on the outside is we'll avoid it, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so this person was basically saying, well, let's use an analogy carry our story or narrative or exploration together. And he said, well, look, we're mapping the minefield. So in the minefield, there's danger or
Mhm.
tension areas, but there's also spaces of safety.
Mhm.
So all the person was trying to say is, look, be aware that there's going to be good and negatives in the same space, and how you learn to sort of navigate your way through
Right.
the minefield. And you just described that. You
Right.
just said you sat, you heard the tension. Your immediate reaction was, okay, let me center myself, or let me calm myself, let the tension flow around me,
Mhm.
or let's see when there's a new moment you could interact. And that's what you
Right.
chose. You said you interacted with that person.
Correct. And as you know, we're supposed to always have that right answer, right? We're always supposed to instantly know what to do because modernity, the current world, the situation that they don't like process. It's like instant results. And sometimes you need to take that time. You need to be able to sort of discern what there is to do. You mentioned Sang, who was with us last week. And one of the things that we were talking about last week, where we're talking about the idea of pausing to take an inventory. Um, when we were discussing the conversations for this week, Sang had mentioned that what do you do after the pause, right? And so that was that whole idea, is that sometimes when you're moving through things in terms of a life transformation, she said the important thing was, where can you be at, what can you do after the pause, right? And so that's the same sort of thing in that discomfort. If you can take that little moment of discernment to begin to see it, because the pattern that we all know really well is that if we use old solutions all the time to manage current discomforts, 6 months later, we're probably going to be back in the same position of discomfort, right? With even a more list of what the mind tells us that we've done wrong, or this hasn't worked out, or even a deeper level of frustration. What is it that that wonderful quote people like to toss around? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? But what we're inviting people to consider is that discomfort, if you stay in it long enough and develop that sense of felt safety, which gives you that pause, right? Then what begins to emerge is you're stepping away from that rigidity of the response, and you begin to see what's possible in the moment.
Yeah, the other thing that came out with when we were talking about what Sang had shared with us, there was more thinking that we wanted to explore, and the misnomer that a pause is not a stop.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that everything ceases. You basically are looking around you, and like she mentioned, taking inventory. So what is actually, and the same thing with the minefield explanation, is there's a map of what's going on in that space. So her saying, look at the inventory
Hmm.
of what's going on, is a helpful exercise to stay within that pause,
Right.
so that you can then continue wherever you want to go. So it may
Hmm.
not be the same direction, it
Right.
may not be with the same speed, but the pause gives you the opportunity to sort of reflect and then take action. So
Yeah. I realize it's kind of a heroic leap, but if those of you who are watching our live stream right now and care to chime in on the chat, if there was a time that you can remember when there was something that was a little uncomfortable for you, and whether or not then something really magical emerged, we often kind of say by accident, or we'll often use a term like synchronicity. Like just when I thought this was going down this direction, there was that moment where I just kind of stayed with it. I wasn't for sure what I did. There are all these cliches that modernity likes to use, which is that when I hit rock bottom, I had this realization. But for for many of us, we have these situations every day. And again, I want to remind you, our topic today, which is the idea of, can you stay in discomfort without rushing to fix it? We're not talking about a situation where we don't want you to tolerate harm. We're not suggesting that you stay in situations that are destroying you. We're inviting you to recognize the difference between a destructive discomfort, which means get out now, and the productive discomfort, that's where there's something that's trying to emerge. And especially as it relates to our own life transitions, um, as to what we're doing, there is this opportunity to find those moments when things emerge, right? We see them in microwave. I was talking with some clients. They were trying to come up with a name for their business, right? And these were three women who were, corporate execs, and they had this, really clear idea of what they wanted their business name to be. And then I watched them all not agree on it, and they were determined to try to fix it in this particular session I was having with them. And I wanted to invite them to consider there might be another way. Is there a possibility that you could just kind of sit with it? I get really great ideas in the shower. Sometimes these wonderful things will happen to me where there's a situation that I've been trying to resolve. And then sometimes, a day later, when I'm really quiet, something else will really kind of emerge out of it. And, I saw them in that moment kind of say to me, well, wait, we have to really resolve this today. And it was like, no, you really don't. You're in the process of putting together a lot of things for your business. And if you rush in to think, this was the first time you all three got together to talk about it. And it isn't like some corporate boardroom where some overlord has said, all right, Jessica and Ray, you need to figure this out before the end of this meeting. And that conditioning that gets kicked into us to somehow problem solve on demand, right, is what gets us into this trap of, because we're either going to do one of two things. We're going to pull something out of thin air just to be able to resolve the situation, or we're going to rearrange the chairs on the Titanic. We're going to do something that isn't particularly in our best interest, because we've often been in situations where the new wasn't particularly welcomed, right? And I'm inviting you that this is that idea of if you're going to be talking about what's emerging, it goes back to something that you've talked about, Ray, which is that ability to sort of sense what is happening, right? And so I guess I must be the only person in the world who has not resolved all of my life situations just because I set aside the time to do it.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to one of the points that you're making is that if you rush to decision, you cut off imagination and creativity because the
Hmm.
door gets closed. And what I've discovered, the brain, funnily enough, actually requires some time to play with the permutations, the possibilities,
Right.
and you just have to read the different stories of creative people.
Hmm.
Uh, they generally started one way and then realized, no, that's not what we want to do, and it was through the brain playing through the permutations and the possibilities of a name element of, well, that's silly, or something else, and it's always the famous combination of non-related things
What do you mean
that
by that?
that basically is that one of the creative exercises they suggest is if you're trying to create let's say a microwave,
Okay.
and they say, well, go look at a completely unrelated area
Hmm.
where you can say, well, what do they do over there? And then you go, well, what does it have in common? What's different about it? So what you're doing is you're thinking in all sorts of different parameters. So it allows you to extend your thinking where you've it's there again. What is it? Going from convergence to divergence and back.
Okay.
And that's what they usually do, is start with broad areas, then converge, but then go back again to what they call converging, so
Hmm.
that you can then say, does it still make sense?
Hmm.
Is it still
Hmm.
what I thought
Hmm.
it was?
I had a friend who's one of his most popular workshops that he did wasn't on subjects of, of fixing a solution, but one of his very most popular workshops was, why is this happening to me again?
Again.
And it was that kicker of again, right? And I think it's oftentimes because, we draw our decisions in the present from experiences that we've had in the past and things that we're concerned about in the future. And it's very understandable. Again, it's we're not trying to have you discount your experience nor not look to what you're imagining. But some of the things that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks as we've been talking about all these things that happen as you're emerging, right? We talked a couple of weeks ago about walking on a bridge that before it was finished, and we talked last week about resources that you've recognizing resources that you may have overlooked. So it's okay right now, and we're this is the invitation for this particular episode is that if you can stay present to what's still forming, right? That is that place where the neurology of your brain, has been trained to avoid this moment at all costs, right? And to fix it as an immediate. Um, because the next part of it is to do whatever exercise you may need in that
Yep.
moment, right? To switch your thinking about it. And it can be a 180, what's right about this situation that I'm not seeing. I have a friend who does that, in the middle of some situation where she's struggling with, she'll say, what's right about this situation that I'm not seeing? I thought that was brilliant. Here's um, another suggestion is that while you're going through, she was learning about how going through a painful divorce, that my feelings aren't right or wrong. They're
Yeah.
just feelings, and sitting with them long enough to let them pass. Right. That's a brilliant strategy of being able to just simply allow the discomfort to inform you. Right. Everyone's nodding along.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's the beauty of getting contributions from chat or in live situations. It forces you to think before you speak. And
Hmm.
and you say, well, what did that mean, or how did that affect what I was thinking? And that's the beauty of the interactions is basically to say, okay, now I have to think about that a bit. And my brain requires a little bit of processing time. I don't have the latest Intel chip in my brain.
Well, and again, it's that idea of recognizing when my friend suggests the whole idea, the strategy of what's right about this situation that I'm not seeing. It flips it. That may be too a dramatic of a situation, right? I don't have a job. Well, what's right about this situation? You have to sometimes deal with the pain of that particular situation. I'm going through a divorce. I'm going through some situation. Well, what's right about this situation? Your mind wants to start arguing and say, well, this isn't right. I shouldn't be in this discomfort. I should have a job. I should have perfect relationships. And so the trap of that is that you're going to get reconditioned that you've done something right or you've done something wrong. And as that last question really illustrated, that keeps you stuck in a loop that's not allowing you to go, why is this happening to me again? Well, let me go back and look at it. This is why it happens. I'm going to keep staying in it and steam. But the trick to getting out of that whole idea of being able to view your discomfort as an opportunity to see what's emerging is to say, I don't have a job. What is it that you would like to do with your life? Well, I can't wait to decide what I need to do with my life. I have bills to pay and whatever. All right. If there's an emergency situation, can you do X job as you're allowing this to emerge? Can you use the next step as a stepping stone to where you want to go? As opposed to saying, I need to get out of this discomfort as soon as possible. And again, we're talking about a self-determined level of safety. There are situations that do require that immediate resolution. But the vast majority of the time, we can, in certain life situations, go, all right, what's there? What's emerging? It may not be there right now, but it helps me set an intention, a new compass moving forward. For me personally, I had a situation where an imagined future that I had had for myself was no longer on the vision board, as it were. I know a lot of people do vision boards and mind mapping, and they put all these wonderful things out there about what they want to do, and that's a way in which it helps your mind begin to sort of see what's possible? What are you moving towards, right? Well, what if something comes up in that situation that changes something on the vision board? There's this disorientation that often happens, right? And the disorientation is uncomfortable. And if you're not able to see that disorientation is, excuse me, that discomfort is part of that disorientation. I mean, how many of you use the GPS in your car, right? How many of you recognize that if you take the wrong turn, you'll get that recalibrating, or, I need to figure out it's not that you've made a right or wrong decision. It requires some level of recalibrating, right? And before your GPS wants to refix your destination as to where you're going, you sometimes need to change the viewmaster of where you're headed, right? And so, in order for that viewmaster, gosh, I'm showing my age by the viewmaster. Probably 90% of the people who are listening to this right now have no idea what I just meant. But try to imagine at one time there was this little device you could put in front of your eyes and you could look into it. Let's talk about it as an early version of VR glasses, right?
Yes.
And the idea was is that you could change the reality of what you were seeing by clicking a button. And that's where if we can move from fixing to flow, fixing that discomfort to flow, that's where the power of the discomfort begins to emerge. New vistas, new horizons need to emerge. And I can probably sense that for some of the people who are listening to this, I know we're dealing in uncomfortable territory, and it's okay not to have an answer in this particular situation as we're moving through something like this. And I invite you, as you're thinking about this, that you don't have to have the answer in this particular time that we're together having a conversation. There may be something that happens to you days or weeks from now where you will recall this, and that may give you a fresh perspective on what you want to do.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something to you were saying as far as flow is what we're bringing to the thinking process is okay, what is the dynamic tension, the push pull phenomena between fix it and flow, or fix it and pause, and fix it and basically being with the discomfort, is the fact that they're together, they're never really separate. It's all part of the process of understanding what's going on. So as you evolve your abilities, your capacities, your muscle memory, your muscle strength to be in that discomfort, there's always going to be that dynamic. So it's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jamie has mentioned several times, it's self-determined.
Mm-hmm.
You decide when enough is enough, or I have to relax a little bit. But being there is really, really important. Is being with that, sitting with
Right.
that discomfort.
Right. And so we develop a new art, the art of not knowing, right? Where there is, because it is a skill that you determine. No one can teach you. I mean, they could explain to you the art of not knowing, but then it all becomes some kind of external thing. Well, okay, it said this, right? But that's the thing about processes, right? It is your process on your timetable, and as you begin to integrate it and apply it, right, that's what makes it an art. And to be able to sort of say, well, I read I'm going to go back and quote Joe Blow again. Jessica loves it when I quote Joe Blow, the Joe Blow School of Self-Transformation this morning. When you read what Joe Blow said is that, you need to spend the first week doing this, the second week doing this, and your third week doing this, so that by the fourth week you've resolved something. Or here is Joe Blow's, instant fix that you can apply in any situation, right? The problem with that is that Joe Blow developed that and figured out a way to sort of quantify it. But Joe Blow forgot to tell you that it's an art, not a simple step. When it comes to things where you have to, as you've said, Ray, and what some of the folks in our chat have said, is it's a process. It's a process of discernment. Isn't something that you learned in a book and then immediately apply it to every situation, right? Um, Discernment is a skill that is developed, that is largely an art. And, good mothers know that the idea is, when they say to their kids, go out and make good decisions today. I think that's what they're supposed to say today, these days, right? Like, instead of the list that I was given when I was going out for the day. But that's teaching people to understand that their process, right, their understanding, their thinking is what works best for them. And when you begin to see results happening time and time and time again that are not what you want, it's not your fault. It's just that you need to, again, adapt the color wheel of the art of not knowing to be able to come up with a solution, right? And you draw that solution from, again, the techniques that we've been talking about on a daily basis. Is this resonating with you or anyone in the chat?
Yeah, I like what's really happening through these discussions and exchanges with live and within the chat is we're co-sensing together. So that's what Jamie just described, is that you start off with, okay, from an internal perspective, this is what I think is happening, and then someone adds an element, and basically what it's about the sensing. Oh, that's not what I thought, or I didn't consider that. So what does that change? So it's not about outside sources telling you what to do or how to feel or how to be. It's about the sharing of those feelings, the thinking, to co-sense together. How does that add to my thinking? And the beauty of communication, when it does work,
Right,
when it's
right.
effective, is it changes all parties.
Right. And again, we talk about this is the sort of the spirit that we do when we gather together on Sunday mornings for Rise and Shine Sundays is that we start with what we call an inquiry, right? And this is this week's inquiry. But what we're trying to do is to do a little bit of what Ray has been talking about today, which is that co-sensing. If I'm here as the sage on the stage, providing you with all sorts of, practical advice often stolen from the Joe Blow school of self transformation. I'm giving you a list that is applicable to Joe Blow and his acolytes, right? And it is not that co sensing. Well, Joe, I found that some of those principles don't apply to me, right? And if we do that, if we do that type of top down sort of prescriptive solutions to something as sensitive as personal transformation, what we're missing is the magic that can emerge when you say to somebody, have you tried it this way? Could you consider it that way?
Yeah, it's the word prescriptive is the way of basically um, the expert telling you what to do. And if the expert tells you, well, you're doing it wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that's right away, that's a bit of a red flag. Is yes, you may be doing it wrong, but it's you that's exploring, experimenting, and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you said it doesn't apply to me, or I don't feel it applies to me, is an opportunity for deeper exploration.
Correct. And can you, when you are in those situations, sometimes it is important to know, I have somebody told me how I get, if I'm facing a particular situation, these are the 3 steps that I need to do. You can go to a good friend, a trusted advisor, or chat GPT about that. But when you need to be in a situation where you're figuring something out, where you're looking at patterns in your own life that you want to be able to say, well, what if there were a different way to do that? Um, Being able to be in an environment with other people who can help you find that, not be prescriptive, who, when grief strikes, don't say, what I did to get over that was, you need to go right back out and start dating again, right? Get back up on that horse. All of these other little, pick yourself up in the bootstraps, swallow your pride, get back in there and face those people. The challenge with all of that is that you run that danger of repeating it. And someone has given you a prescription which could be applicable, but you need to be with people, or you need to be in environments that allow you to have that co-sensing, to allow you to, for people to stay with you in your discomfort. And so even this particular episode, which, those of you who may be listening and are doing other things, it would be great if we put on happy music and be able to say, hey, let's all just spend some time imagining that better vista. But what if we were able to provide a container where we allowed you to think about things that may be uncomfortable for you, and gave you a little bit of a taste of the art of not knowing, that you are okay in that pause, that you can develop that skill of staying with the discomfort, and you don't have to do it alone, because you can gather with people in that space of not knowing, and you're okay, at least here on Sunday mornings.
That's awesome. That's essentially it. And you and I've talked about this a lot. Um, these spaces don't happen by themselves.
That's correct.
You have to consciously and with intent seek them out or create them or work with others who are creating them. And I think that's it. Is there's a definite need
Mm-hmm.
for that type of space for
Mm-hmm.
others to sort of share, to feel safe, to share, to sit with the uncomfortable, to sit with the unknown. And I think that those are all elements
Yeah,
that I think are not necessarily readily available or
correct.
uh, directly structured because they're really not structured in the traditional sense.
Right. And I guess what we're inviting to is, it's not necessarily that you always need to sit with others who share the wound, although that can be helpful. The difference between a support group and, if you will, a presencing group, is that the bond isn't over the wound. The bond is being with the pause to be able to see what's emerging. And while things are emerging, that may mean that you unearth the wounds. You may talk about the wounds, but the destination of your time together, the idea of being with the discomfort without rushing to fix it, doesn't mean that you bypass the wound that's there that created it. It's just that your time for the co-sensing is to be able to see what emerges together in that same sort of space. And it's a challenging space to be in, but that's why for this week I wanted to make sure that our invitation was for people, that um, this pattern of rushing to fix things, right, is something that we've been deeply conditioned to do. There are times when being able to provide wonderful solutions in the moment are great. And I was so grateful at this particular gathering today that, Jessica's comment, the importance of discernment, is there, and the other things that we've seen that people have shared in the chat. We are uh, progressive, creative, emergent beings. What is life? Life is progressive, creative expression, right? The idea that there is, and oftentimes, if we try to control it too much, we're going to let that growth always happen based on approaches and techniques that we've used from the past. And what helps us get there is, again, developing that fixed sense, from fixing to flow, and recognizing that we put ourselves in that flow, that we want to have that surrounded by other people whose flow is towards that emergence, towards that's what's developing for us. So that, my friends, is where we have emerged in this particular edition of Rise and Shine Sundays. So this is an episode and information that you might want to carry with you as you go through your week. And if I can extend other invitations to you at this particular point in time, we have a website that is called magically riseandshinesundays.com. And if you're interested in joining us in this conversation in the studio, you're always welcome to join us. With that, you're welcome to join us in the chat. And one of the things that I'm going to hold out for those of you who are listening to our live stream is that I can sense that because of some of the things that are developing in the background and in the communities that we're involving ourselves in, our broadcast container may switch from this type of a format on YouTube to a different platform where we can involve more people in the process of emerging and the discussion. We do this every week, where we dare to, if you will, go live unscripted around a central question. We welcome people to make suggestions for us. We also welcome, any comments that you might have as we're beginning to close in the chat today. But we're really grateful for being able to have this conversation about an uncomfortable topic, if you will, or an uncomfortable approach. But I think we can all agree that sometimes just taking that breath in and that breath out, that says what else is possible without rushing to fix things. And you get to self-determine that, and you have the ability to check in with others who can help you with that co-sensing, as Ray has said, because that helps to develop that discernment skill, helps you know when to choose in the right moment, when you can go into autopilot and respond, right? But it gives you that wonderful gift that Sang was talking with us last week of, what do you do after the pause? What do you do when you are able to sort of catch that breath? So that is the invitation. Ray, was there anything else that you wanted to say or offer?
I was just going to add another part of your invitation for others to join us is I had an interesting experience this week, and I had heard about it, but within the discussion, it added a lot. Yes, we understand not everybody is comfortable with the camera on. So
Right.
what happened in this discussion group that we were talking about something that was personal to one of it was called the wise crowd exercise, where others present ideas. And part of the process is the person who we're assisting or talking with turns off their camera. And what's interesting is the exchange continued very, very positively and warmly. And if you're a little bit concerned about being on camera, join us with your camera off. Your
Mm-hmm.
voice has weight,
Mm-hmm.
has power, and warmth and dimension and emotion in it. So it adds to the contribution because it's an extension of the chat. So
Correct.
that might be, it breaks the mold a little bit,
Right.
but it adds to the fact that you're present with us.
Correct.
And would be
Yeah.
kind of a fun thing, even if it's just for a little, for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever. I found it's dynamic.
Right.
So open invitation to that. That hey, if you want to try it,
Yeah.
might
No,
be
and that's a
cool.
really important thing to remember, because presencing, I know a number of people are talking about how the aspect of presence is important in their life. And present doesn't actually mean tangible within your immediate environment. Presence can be extended across the internet, across some psychic pathway that you can establish. And one of the things that I appreciate so much about what you're saying, Ray, is that that is again a different way of not expecting it to always look the same way, right? And the way you know that is you go back to the felt sense that that it integrated, right? And so that's that skill, that art of developing it, of being able to see what's possible and what's available. And I think that's a great way to sort of end this particular episode. I do want to remind you that coming up next on the Breakthrough Show Network is Spirit Sundays, which will be at the top of the hour. We are, as always, grateful for you who have spent some time with us to be with us live here on the live stream. And those of you who may be listening to the rebroadcast of it, again, please go to Rise and Shine Sundays. Join us here. Your presence is welcome wherever you choose to express. The invitation is open. So as you stay in this discomfort and as you encounter those things, we invite you to go from fixing to flow this week, and to begin to kind of maybe even report back to us the power of productive discomfort. So for Ray and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to having you with us next week.